Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Shadow and Sun Show, and welcome back to another equipment video. This time, the big one, at least for me, the things that I wanted the most out of RPGs from the time I first spied the Player's Handbook back in 1979-80, when it talked about how a ranger could not really build a fortress or a castle or anything like that until attaining like 9th or 10th level, at which point he would get a bunch of men who would serve him and all these other cool things. And I noticed that the fighter, the cleric, the magic user, the thief, the assassin, I think even the monk might have received minions after a while, but it wasn't so much the minions as it was the good old-fashioned real estate. I think we discount or forget about the idea that these player characters at least would have desires, at least for their retirement, if not, at some point during their career, to have a place they could call home. And, depending on the character, class, profession, could kind of inform the DM and the player like what that might be. A fighter, while he might, have dreams and aspirations of being the lord of a mighty fortress, a castle, something like that. Well, there are steps along the way to getting, that kind of land and responsibility, as well as all the benefits that would go along with being the owner or the lord of a castle or a keep, a citadel, things like that. Along each of the old character types, projected timeline and success level as they go up in levels, there are various pieces of land or even titles and stewardships over things that could be part of the whole emerging game story of that particular character. Maybe it may not coincide with everybody else, and it really shouldn't always be mandatory that everybody in the party, they're just murder hobos going from place to place, looking for an adventure, looking for some trouble to get into, looking for a dungeon to delve into, looking for some excuse to kill monsters and take their stuff. There are a whole lot of other ways that a player character could, at the very least, earn experience points and experiences that would help them attain the next level or the next milestone in their life, in their career. The the fighter could, be, for whatever reason, given, like I said earlier, a title, maybe because of some deed. The local nobility could raise them up a notch in their social standing if you use the old social class tables from the Unearthed Arcana, which I highly recommend, or coming up with your own, and other games have taken that to heart and use that, depending on where the circumstances of your birth might indicate that well, your family's already got this big old chunk of land, and when you come of age, or when you do the right thing, or when your old man kicks the bucket, or maybe your parents may decide, well, enough of that adventuring. We're making you responsible for this keep, this castle, this fortress. Maybe it's just a tract of land, or a manor, or a mansion, or some estate off somewhere else, and family obligations, and you can easily just bail on them, of course. But it makes sense to me that if your world is a living, breathing world that somewhat mimics Earth's past in the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, or even other ages, there are things out there for your player characters besides just the next adventure, the next dungeon to go underground and dig around and look for treasure and trinkets and MacGuffins and monsters and all their all that goes with that. Starting right off the bat, low-level parties could easily be or benefit from, at the very least creating a camp, an old-timey wagon train type camp that maybe it's going to become semi-permanent, but if it, bothers the local gentry, they can always move it on down the road, multiple wagons and hangers on, and your cook and your tanner and the NPCs, the henchmen, hirelings that you might hire, the porters and all those guys. You could slowly be building up the beginnings of a small society, or of some sort. Maybe you chip in, you all buy a piece of land and you start building on it, or maybe one of the characters acquires it through an inheritance or through a gift or reward. And it's not just the fighters and the rangers and the paladins and the cavaliers. The priests, or the clerics, by virtue of attaining third or fourth or seventh level, could be required by that particular religion to take over a monastery or a, what did I write down here, a chapel or a church, or spend a year guarding this particular shrine because hobgoblins are in the area. All the little steps along the way, up to founding and creating and building a temple to their deity that they're responsible for, because in all reality it would never really truly be theirs. No matter how much they spend on it, it's still going to belong to whoever's above that particular player character, priest, high priest. There's probably somebody above them in the church, above them, and yeah, sure, you built this great temple, but it belongs to the church, so to speak. Or maybe you run things differently, and the priest cleric character could, in fact, through the money that he keeps that wasn't tithed away, could build a manor, an estate, a temple, and all the things that go with it. And let's not forget the good old-fashioned thief, the rogue, the scoundrel. There's all kinds of pieces of land or safe houses that they could be rewarded with through their efforts. Maybe they find an abandoned cabin out in the woods and turn that into their impromptu fledgling thieves guild. Finding a hideout, a sanctuary, a shelter, making someplace their den of ill-gotten activities, or some sort of safe haven that when the heat is on or when the adventure is over, they have a place to go. They've earned it. They paid for it. Even Grey Mouser and Fafford in the beginning, in the first book, they had their little hideaway for however short that was. They still had a place to call their own for a little while. Then you come, of course, to and the same goes for the assassin, and the same goes for the monk as the priest. All those things could be, in fact, part of their life path, their responsibilities as well as rewards for their activities, serving their particular profession. The magic user, sure, it says, they can build a tower at 9th or 10th level or whatever, but that doesn't mean they can't build a laboratory somewhere or be allowed regular access to somebody else's laboratory or library or just a room in a castle to do their experiments until they're they've made the big time. Maybe if they're part of a guild, a magic guild, if you have such things in your world, they could be rewarded with a regular apartment and access to the laboratory and the library and the summoning chambers and all those things like that. All of these things would make for a reward besides the usual, you get 500 gold pieces for bringing back the MacGuffin. Okay, well, maybe they get that, but you also throw in these hooks, because all of these places that I mentioned could have hooks of their own. I've run many games where a player inherits a piece of land that, sure enough, it's haunted, or there's goblins nearby and they've got to clear it out and do all the heavy lifting to make it safe for normal habitation. I ran Teagle Manor as an inheritance to a party where they inherited the land, but as you all know, Teagle Manor is just every room has got something in it, which could make for an entire campaign. Clearing that out, then with the adjacent lands and the dungeon underneath and all that stuff could just could be the adventure on its own. And why not? It doesn't always have to be going down the road to the next place and the next place and the next place. Giving your player characters a home base, a place they can call their home, somewhere safe to rest that isn't a tavern room in the next town. That to me seems like a miserable existence of town to town. If you go and look at the famous Conan story, I forget which one it was. It was in the latter half of the Gnome books, where his last coin was spent on a room in a tavern, only for him to be accosted in the middle of the night, and they were just going to feed him to something. I forget exactly what in the story. They're just going to feed him to the local whatever. You can't live like that for long. Having had a traveling occupation where I was hotel to hotel for 2 or 3 years of my life, it has its benefits, but it gets real lonely and real depressing after a while when you don't know where you're going to be a month from now. And I know a lot of people would say, oh, that's exciting. Yeah, sure it is, until you've had your place broken into a dozen times in a dozen weeks, whether it be by the maids or the staff or the people in the next room, because you had adjoining doors and they just fiddled with it enough to break in when you took your leave to go to a restaurant. You come back and your place has been tossed. Yeah, that would be a regular occurrence for the adventuring party, and having some place where that's not going to be the case in itself is a huge reward. So these are some ideas I thought I'd share with you from my perspective of rewarding your players or allowing them to obtain small comforts instead of just constantly living out of a backpack and a bedroll, or the equivalent of a hotel room for the night when they can afford it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. What do you guys think of staying in hotels? What do you think of letting your players create a home of their own, whether it be a camp, a cathedral, a grand mansion, a huge estate, a castle? I'd love to hear about it in the comment section. Otherwise, I will see you in about 45 minutes with Second Breakfast with the Morning Reprobates. Hope you guys had a great weekend. I'll talk to you real soon. And until then, happy trails.